Hello and welcome to the Virtuous Life. I'm your host, Pat Odie Murray. And when you listen to this show, when this airs, we will be in the midst of Catholic Schools Week, Catholic education. I am a big proponent of Catholic education. However, not all Catholic education is created equal. And one of the things that I have always talked about when I go out and give presentations to Catholic schools is why we are different, what makes us different, what we must be about, Catholic identity. And so, and some schools do that remarkably well. Other schools struggle a little bit with it, especially in our current culture. One of the schools that has always very much impressed me, and I have supported in the past in many ways, is Wyoming Catholic College. I've had people from their show on to talk about various articles they've posted online or things that I've gotten in the mail that I want to talk more to them about. They have always been gracious and right on the money when it comes to the faith. And so I was blessed enough in the morning offering segment show in the morning that we do for Ave Maria to talk with this next gentleman. And he is the president of the college, which always makes me excited that a president will take an hour out of his life to be on the Virtuous Life. And it is Father Deacon Kyle Washut. And I enjoyed my conversation with him on morning offering, and I thought, I want to have a longer conversation with him. So welcome, Father Deacon Kyle Washut. How are you today?
Doing well. Thanks so much for having me on the show.
Well, you've been president there since 2023, August of 2023. And for our audience, the Father Deacon might throw them a little bit because if I'm correct, you're from the Eastern Church, right? The Eastern segment of the Catholic Church. Am I correct?
That is correct. I'm a deacon in the Byzantine Catholic Eparchy of Phoenix.
Got it. And so that's a term that they use for deacons, Father Deacon?
That's right. So in both East and West, it was common to call just monks Father. And that was even the non-ordained. That's where we get the idea of the Desert Fathers. Father Anthony of the Desert was called, was never ordained. Those sorts of titles. And then if you were ordained, the title Father was put with your level of ordination. So Father as a general spiritual father for the monks, Father Deacon for the one who is ordained a deacon, Father Presbyter for if you're ordained a priest, Father Bishop if you're ordained a bishop. And the only holdover at this point is Father Deacon. At this point, we only call priests Father as a general thing, and we refer to bishops just as bishop. And it has completely fallen out in the West, but the tradition still is there in the East.
In the East. That's great. Now, you're the fourth president, if I'm not mistaken, of Wyoming Catholic
correct.
College. Yeah. So, and you were a professor there before, academic dean. So how long have you been involved with Wyoming Catholic College?
Well, I was the founding dishwasher of Wyoming Catholic College, so I've been there since the beginning. Yeah.
I love it. I love it. So that whole thing of service has always been a part of your life, right?
That's right. So there was nowhere to go but up. So it's been good.
So tell me what made Catholic education something that you wanted to be involved in? What did you see there that you thought this is where I want to be?
So I'd grown up, I'd been to Catholic schools and had then attended a community college where I met the people who would end up being the founders of Wyoming Catholic College. And they were really the ones that introduced me to the depths and breadth of the Catholic intellectual tradition.
So,
and it really was a profound conversion moment for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. When you talk about the depth, can you explain that to our audience? What is, because I think even for Credo Catholics, sometimes we don't quite understand the depth of the Catholic faith that you're talking about.
Yeah, I think that is, so the people I studied with, one of them had been a student of a man named Dr. John Sr., who had started the Integrated Humanities program out in Kansas in the 70s and in the early 80s. And in that program, what they had done is they'd read what we would call the great books of Western civilization. They were reading things like Aesop's Fable, the Odyssey, various other poems. And when we list those kind of titles, we don't immediately think Catholic tradition, because those are ancient Greek pagan texts that were written thousands of years before Christ. And when we tell that story, but those were the beginnings of the way they would describe them was they were, in a certain sense, the forerunners to the fullness of the Catholic tradition that was going to come. Just as John the Baptist was the prophetic forerunner, in a sense, men like Socrates and Homer were the intellectual forerunners to Christ. And so this view that they introduced me to was a way of reading all of the great history of the Catholic intellectual tradition, beginning with the ancient Greeks, going through Scripture, going into Rome, and then reading the Church Fathers, and from the Church Fathers reading the emergent literature and philosophy and theology that all came bubbling out, and seeing all of that as either a precursor or a fruit of the conversion to Christ, coming to see the conversion of the mind and the preparation of the human soul, that when God came to save us in Christ, he came to save our minds, he came to save our experience of reality, he came to save our storytelling. And the Catholic intellectual tradition tries to grab all of that, lets the salvation of the faith trickle down and fill up the way we think about and the way we experience reality. And so the Catholic intellectual tradition is manifesting that. And so it goes deep, deep, deep into the human experiences, the human thoughts. And that's the thing I was introduced to, and it was life-changing for me.
So one of the things over my lifetime, I've seen education really shift. And sometimes it's done so gradually that you don't even realize the shift is occurring until you stop for a moment and look back. And I want to know, what kind of shifts have you seen in education, ones that concern you, and ones that you think are for the betterment of education?
So there's a way in which I think it's easy to tell the story of Catholic education in the late 20th century as a story of decline of Catholic identity. Back in the early 20th century, say 1901, say, Georgetown, the first Catholic university in America, still only had 150 students at the most. It was a small, intensive Catholic liberal arts college for Jesuit young men who wanted to study with the Jesuits. Mm-hmm. And that was sort of the model and the norm for what we were looking at certainly higher level Catholic education in the early 20th century. That grew. Partly it grew in the way that college education grew in America. Simply, there were all sorts of people coming to enroll. And we also saw major shifts at that time in college education. A shift away from thinking of college education solely or even principally in terms of moral and cultural formation, and more toward thinking of college education as both a research institution and as a focus on career development, vocational prep, technical vocational prep. That really led to an explosion in the number of people going to higher ed and huge growth for these Catholic colleges, such that they got large endowments over time, they're beautiful buildings, more and more prestige, more and more recognition, along the lines we're seeing mirrored in these more secular or Protestant universities at the same time. But then there was a big shift to de-emphasize Catholic identity, to lower the requirements for the amount of study in the Catholic intellectual tradition one needed to do, to de-emphasize the spiritual formation, those sorts of things. And it happened because you're trying to get more students, you're trying to be more established mainline in various ways. and maybe even initially had the goal of a real genuine evangelical desire, but then stopped offering the kind of fuel that would lead to more conversions. And so that's really the story of the early 20th century and late 20th century, the rise in influence of Catholic higher ed and then the real decrease in the intensity or the Catholicity of Catholic higher ed. Beginning in the later quarter of the 20th century, we saw these incredible movements to establish new schools or to reform schools that were going to re-emphasize Catholic identity and re-emphasize an immersion in the Catholic intellectual tradition. That, I think, has been one of the exciting success stories, so that especially beginning to hit their peak in the 90s and then into 2000, when Wyoming Catholic College was founded in 2005 as the most recent of these schools, this really exciting moment of conversion in higher education. So I think that is an incredibly exciting story of watching that. We're still a drop in the bucket, just a small number of schools that are doing this, and yet that, I think, is a great, exciting story. The bigger concern... Oh, go ahead.
No, please, keep going. It's wonderful. I'm just writing little notes here. Go ahead.
The big concern now, and this is the one that Pope Leo keeps stressing, is that now, I think the main thing that we're really facing in this new part of the 21st century is the question of even human education. That while the focus at the later part of the 20th century was, can we have these little islands that are going to focus on devout Catholic intellectual tradition and Catholic formation, Catholic spiritual formation, Catholic moral formation? Can we have those places? And can some of those even not be focused solely on career prep, but focused on this kind of comprehensive formation that was the guiding light for traditional Catholic universities in the early part of the 20th century? That's all exciting and wonderful. Well, I think the big crisis for education now, though, is the question of, is it even focused on authentic human formation anymore? And one of the big things that is making that question acute is the question of AI, artificial intelligence.
Oh, yeah.
We've been excited about the promise of what digital education can bring. We've been excited about the prospect of technology. And yet now, in a situation where we've moved more and more to having education communicated over text or over the internet, and now moving to whatever the prospects are of artificial intelligence, Pope Leo keeps reminding Catholic educators that there are distinctly human gifts and human abilities, the ability to think, the ability to be creative, the ability to have profound experience and meditate on it, that in certain poor ways AI can imitate. But those experiences, those activities are the fundamental core of education. And the big challenge for higher education in the future is going to be reforming into small communities that allow for that kind of focus on those deeply human aspects of education that are going to allow for human flourishing. And that, I think, is going to end up with a reform of the higher education university system in general, not just the Catholic. But that is the big challenge that our Holy Father is calling Catholic schools to focus on now.
Yeah. Well, let me ask, I've just been writing like crazy here as you're talking. So let me ask a couple of things to kind of pick your brain here. Part of the issue is, when you were talking about the great books and the humanities and so important to the depth of Catholic schools. And yet we have, like you said, we've made this shift right into more careers. College is about getting you ready for careers or doing research. It's not about human formation in a sense. How do we get people to understand that the humanities, or what we talk about as far as liberal arts, are so important, because the mindset today is those are all pointless classes that I just have to take. I want to get to my major, which is like, social work or business or whatever. That's the important stuff, because that's getting me ready for my job. How do we break through that? Have you been successful in anything? Any ideas in that area? That's a frustration for me.
I completely understand the frustration. Now, I think we have to note that, in part, traditional liberal arts classes are themselves to blame for the reputation we've gotten, because there have been so many bizarre classes that have gone under the title of humanities or liberal arts in the higher education service, where people feel like those are agenda-driven classes, ideologically driven classes, or fluff classes. They're not experiencing them as moments of growth in what it means to be human and reflecting on their experience and deep, profound intellectual conversion. So the first thing we need to do is just make sure that when we're off with classes, we make them good, we make them meaty, we make them transformative and powerful.
Right.
But the other thing that's one thing we focus, but then we need to focus on what's the salesmanship of it as we go to someone and try to convince them this is the kind of education you need.
Right.
And there, I think it's always, I end up telling parents or talking with students, and everyone is in agreement that, yes, of course, if I want to be an engineer, or if I want to be a lawyer, if I want to be a doctor, it's clearly not sufficient for me to go to a school with other people who want to be lawyers and doctors, and then ideally hang out with some lawyers and doctors or engineers, go to engineering on tap once a night, drink some beers, ask some questions of some engineers. And if I do that for 4 years, I'll be ready to be a good, solid engineer. That'd be laughable. We'd say, no, in no way are you going to just sort of pick up engineering on the side. You have to study in a disciplined, careful way to acquire those skills so that you're able to be a good professional engineer or a doctor or a lawyer. Everyone agrees to that. And so then I ask, what about being a good Catholic person? Do we think that is something you can just pick up on the side? And initially you might say, oh, sure, it seems like something you can pick up on the side, to which I then say, does it look like that works very well? Or are we surrounded by tons and tons societally of really good, virtuous, perceptive people that have picked it up on the side? No. The answer is that any habit, and virtue is a habit, and wisdom is a habit, and holiness, in a certain sense, can be seen as a habit. Any habit is developed by the same way we're going to develop the habits of engineering or the habits of medicine or the habits of law. Study and practice and emulation, and with an intense focus on that. And you say, where does that happen at the university? That is what should be happening in the liberal arts tradition. That's what the Catholic intellectual tradition is trying to do, is to cultivate those habits intellectually, experientially, even habitually in the person. And so why are those things important? Well, because you're only a professional 40 hours a week. You're supposed to be a good husband or a wife or a mother or a father or a member of the pew in the community and a citizen. You need to be that kind of a person all the time. And so that focus, which is going to come through good, authentic human-forming classes in the liberal arts and humanities, that's what you need to come and focus on with those courses.
So do you think that as Catholic schools kind of moved away from Catholic identity, and there are numerous reasons, universities, a lot of times it was numbers, right? We want to grow, we want to be bigger, so we got to, we can't just have Catholics here. We've got to accept everybody. But even in primary and secondary education, the same thing, right? And as laity enter into the teaching field, they may not know their faith, they may not know how to live it out, or they may not be Catholic. So there's all these things at work that kind of pulls apart Catholic identity, and some deliberately choose not to put that forward. But do you think that we've when we move away from Catholic identity, that is one of the reasons the humanities go off the deep end. Like they're not moored to anything. So anybody can decide what they want to moor their course to.
I think that's absolutely correct. That at some level, with the incarnation, when our Lord came, he came to reveal to us what it meant to be authentically human, and that's what interpreted humanity. And so the humanities, in that sense, that word of humanity, the study of what it is to be human, that in its fullness is the Second Vatican Council. That in its fullness is received in Jesus Christ. And to have had that and to have lost it is going to mean that there's a kind of flailing around, a loss of focus, a loss of vision. But when people first came, as these numbers exploded, the reason people were attracted to going to Catholic education is because an education that's centered on the person of Jesus Christ and is able to engage with all of the breadth of human experience, deeply show us what it is to be human, they're attracted to that, and they see success, and they want to come. And then as we water it down and stop being focused on the person of Jesus Christ in the Catholic tradition, then the very thing that made us popular and attractive to the non-Catholics to come and join and to increase our numbers goes away, and we end up with these unmoored classes that are no longer fulfilling and now seem like fluff. I think that's absolutely right.
Yeah, boy, that is certainly, I think, a challenge. And I want to ask you, because Wyoming Catholic College is a small college, right? What's your, how many students do you have?
So we have just under 200 students enrolled full-time in residence in our tiny town. We have another 1,000 students that will come with us for a week to 3 weeks on these intensive experiential outdoor Catholic courses that we offer. But very, very tiny when it comes to the in-residence group. Like I said, just less than 200.
Okay. So now has your college then made a decision that we're okay? We don't have to be, keep having a goal every year to increase another 100 or 200 or 300 students. We're going to take what the Lord gives us and make it the best experience. How do you, because the world constantly tells us we just need to keep growing, and we'll do anything to keep growing. So what do you do with that? How does the mission kind of form that at your college?
So there are two things that are sort of constantly back and forth with us when we reflect on the size of the college. On the one is the deep hunger to know that the more authentic Catholic education we can provide to the more people, the better it is. So that's why we have our Catholic Outdoor Renewal Expeditions, our core expeditions program that we offer even for those who are not enrolled full-time. We know that you come with us for a week or 3 weeks and you have this deep experience of prayer and community and wonder in the backcountry. And then you can read a book ahead of time or talk with a professor, have some time to frame that experience. Whether you do that for 1 to 3 weeks, that's going to be profoundly good. So we want to get that out as much as we can and get as many people going. But on the other hand, we are very aware, like Georgetown was not just over 100 years ago, that deep, authentic formation requires real community. It requires the professors to be sitting in the cafeteria and in the classrooms and know the students by name. We need to have chaplains that know the students by name. We need to have our students living together and studying together. And in that sense, we're committed to, we can never get so big that we turn into just a machine that's churning out products. We'd love to grow more. Right now, we're receiving around 50 students a year, and that's what we have the capacity for. We're getting ready to ramp up to get closer to getting, in the next couple of years, getting closer to 70 students a year. That's still a tiny drop in the bucket. We're thinking, well, that's remarkable growth compared to the giant industrial scale of a legacy university. That's nothing. But for us, that's big growth, and we're excited about that. But there, we're keeping that number small, in part because we have various things that require us to keep that small. All of our freshmen have to go out on a 3-week expedition before they start, 3-week backpacking expedition before they start. They'll spend over the course of their 4 years, another 7 weeks in the backcountry. They have to spend a semester on horsemanship. And keeping the right ratio of horses and backpacks for students, helps keeps the numbers a little bit small as we dial that in.
Right.
But that formation we're offering, we're convinced is going to yield, in gospel terms, 100-fold. It's the small seed that we're sending out, and that will bear fruit in the wilderness once it leaves from us. So that's not a model of how much Coca-Cola can we sell and can we sell more as we grow at astronomical rates, but how many people can we authentically form in a deep, intensive way? And then, like you said, who will the Holy Spirit send us for that?
Yeah. And, we've got about 2 minutes left, a minute and a half here in the first half of the show. But I think it's very interesting, and I want to maybe pick up with this, President Washut, as we get to the second half of the show, because I want to talk to you more about technology and things like that. But I think what you're saying here, your community has a deep connection to creation in its outdoor experiences. And I don't know of a lot of colleges that do what you do. I mean, I'll be honest, and I don't know every college in the United States, but I haven't run across any. And I remember so many things that I have read in the past. Even my second minor, or my second major, is psychology, is that young people do best when they are connected to nature, to the created order, in a sense. And technology certainly takes us away from that. And so there's just so much I want to talk with you about in the second half. So I want to let the audience know we're talking to Father Deacon Kyle Washut. He is the 4th president of Wyoming Catholic College. And we're talking about Catholic education in general, its challenges, its gifts, ways to approach it. And I think that we're going to have more challenges as we move into this AI world that's out there. And so we're having just a great conversation. So I hope you'll come back on the other side of the break and come back and join us. This is The Virtuous Life. I'm your host, Pat Odie Murray.
This is a Young Catholic Minute.
Why is contraception wrong?
In sex, the husband and wife give themselves to each other fully, freely, faithfully, and fruitfully, which is the kind of love that everyone longs for. No one says, "I hope my wife cheats on me," or "I want my soulmate to hide things from me." So why is "I love you but not your fertility" okay? Christ showed us true love by giving his whole life freely, without reservation, never abandoning us, even if it meant dying on a cross. This sacrifice gave us eternal life. If you've been listening, you might get where we're going. Sex is only loving when it's a free, total, faithful, and fruitful gift of self, like Christ's love. In fact, in every Catholic marriage ceremony, the bride and groom vow to love each other in this very way. So you decide, do you want your marriage to reflect God's love? Or would you rather settle for something less? For more Young Catholic Minutes, go to youtube.com/youngcatholic.
Pope Francis said, "The key that opens the door to faith is prayer." Join St. Paul Street Evangelization by running a prayer station in the public square. Find out more and get involved today at streetevangelization.com.
Experience the incredible story of the woman who Time magazine named the most influential Catholic woman in the United States. Born Rita Rizzo, the future mother Angelica grew up in a rough neighborhood in Canton, Ohio. Young Rita experienced abandonment, rejection, and heartache, but God touched her through a woman named Rhoda Wise. Encounter this amazing woman at the Mother Angelica Museum. Plan your visit today at motherangelicamuseum.com.
Welcome back to The Virtuous Life. I'm your host, Pat Odie Murray, and today we're just having, I think, a wonderful conversation with President Kyle Washut. It's Father Deacon Kyle Washut. He's a member of the Byzantine Rite of the Catholic Church. So for those of you who only think everything's Roman Catholic, you got to check this out. We have a Byzantine church here where I live, not too far from me, and just amazing to see the unity that is involved, even though we're not uniform. I always point that out, and I think there is a blessing in that we need to be aware of. Sometimes we just think of our own right as the only right. So I kind of went off track there, but he is the fourth president of Wyoming Catholic College. And we've had a great conversation thus far about Catholic education during this Catholic Schools Week. And we're going to keep going because he is so good about all this. Welcome back. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with us, President Washut. I really appreciate it.
Oh, just happy to have the conversation with you. I love Catholic education and love talking to people who are equally passionate about it.
Well, one of the things that you mentioned as you were talking about your college, Wyoming Catholic College, is that you want this to be about real community, that professors know students by name, that your students live together, that you're actually building a real community. And I have become more and more aware that technology, we try to sell it as building community. Oh, we can have, I remember being trained in online, because I teach at a local college, and, being trained in online teaching. And I'm like, well, how do we have discussions? Well, there are discussion boards. And I'm thinking, okay, and I've used them and I don't like them. But I have become more and more like, I know my students probably think, what is it, that term, that I'm a Luddite, because I am moving away more and more from technology. No technology in the classroom while we have class. And studies even show that kids remember better if they write, if they, how they process when they write. And yet we just seem to be so drawn to technology like it is the most wonderful thing in the world. And I'm not saying there are not good things about it. But we're moving into a whole nother age with AI. And all of this technology takes us away from what you talked about right before the break in having your kids out in God's creation, doing these 3-week expeditions out in the backcountry of Wyoming. I mean, connecting with the Creator through His creation. Technology doesn't do that, I don't think. So my thing is, can you tell me what's your approach to technology at a Wyoming Catholic? Why do you have that approach? And where is, how does AI fit into all of this? Because that's all a part of it. And certainly we can talk about how does the Catholic Church, what are they giving us, and especially Pope Leo, to help us understand what to do with all this, because it's becoming overwhelming.
Right. So we can look back over the history of technology and education for the last 30 or 40 years and realize that every major technological revolution we've been assured is going to utterly revolutionize education for the better. It's going to possibly replace teachers or really change what teachers need to do, et cetera, et cetera. That was true of the television. That's true of the internet. That was true of the cell phone. And that's also going to be true of the developing innovations with AI. So every time we're presented with technology as this incredible tool that's going to revolutionize this ancient work of education. We're going to be able to do it on a bigger scale. We're going to be able to do it more effectively. We're going to have more resources, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And there's something that is true about that. There have been real incredible tools that have been presented or opportunities that have been presented with each one of these developments in tech. But I think in general, if you look back, and again, focusing especially on the liberal arts studies or the humanizing studies, less maybe on research or some more technical skills, if you look at those, you say, do we think people are better readers, are better at basic math, are better at communicating, better at thinking, better with knowing where they are in sort of history and space? and geographically? And the answer there seems to be consistently no, that's getting worse, even with the incredible technological innovations that we've been seeing. And strikingly, you can see that with the tech companies and the CEOs of tech that are very often developing the next new thing, whether that's the Chromebook or the iPad, and they want to get that into every classroom. And you ask, well, how do your kids like it? And they say, oh, no, my kids go to a no-tech school. My kids go to a Waldorf school or a Montessori school, or, we don't do this. Yeah, we go to a classical charter. We are not doing any of this tech stuff, which makes you already think, okay, there's something going on there. So that's the first, I think, just initially, on the one hand, as Pope Leo says, don't be technophobic. Technology is a creation and a work of the human genius that is meant to serve and help us in our relationship to each other and to creation system. We can't be technophobic. Absolutely right. But also, I think we could be overly optimistic about, hey, because I have this new piece of technology, it's going to replace whatever the thing may be. I think in general, people find that dating apps have not incredibly improved the experience of dating in human culture. We have found that texting with each other has not improved our face-to-face presence communication. That doesn't mean that there's not real benefits to those things, but just knowing that with every piece of technology, there's both an extended reach that it gives us, but it also changes certain of our internal habits and risks losing sight of certain habits that we have for real, authentic human flourishing. I tell folks that the cautionary tale of fig leaves can be a really good example of the risks of technology and education. In this sense, when Adam and Eve fell, the first thing they did was build fig leaves as clothing. And they made those fig leaves as camouflage. So they looked like plants. So they wouldn't have to leave the Garden of Eden. They looked like they belonged, even though the use of fig leaves, this use of inventive human creativity, also obscured and hid from the authentic human things that made them distinct from the plants, right? Their relationship with each other, with God, with themselves. The plant was meant to obscure that, and God said, get rid of those fig leaves. Let me give you garments of skin and send you out. There's this real notion that there's a risk that when we do technology, we do something that sacrifices the fundamental relationships that cultivate our human experience. All right, so that's the fundamental framework I have when we think about technology and education. And so at Wyoming Catholic College, we ask all of our students to commit to a fast from tech. Not because we think technology is intrinsically evil, but because that fast, that faith to focus on those most fundamental relationships is going to be what allows them to flourish as thinkers, as virtuous people, as praying people. And so for the 4 years they're students with us, they fast from their smartphone. We have limited access to Wi-Fi and the internet, and they still receive a fantastic education. And when they leave, they still know how to use a smartphone. They still know how to navigate the internet. There's not somehow that they don't know how to respond to these things. And in the culture of AI, where we ask our students to promise not to use AI to write their papers, or we design tests that are taken, written, or face-to-face conversation, not typed on a computer, all of that to focus on those distinctly human things. So we're not camouflaging, we're not pretending not to be in a relationship, but we're leaning into our vulnerabilities, leaning into our relationality, our small community, our own thought, our own capacity for virtue, and developing those. And that is really fundamental to our approach to education.
I love that because I think, unfortunately, I think a lot of Catholic schools see this, they're not willing to take the risk to be different. Right. They think, well, if we don't give everybody a laptop, or if we don't give everybody a tablet, so and so that this high school's doing it or that college is doing it, and so we have to do it, instead of saying, no, we don't have to do it, and to take the risk and to trust that if this is what it means to be Catholic is much greater than getting tied in with all of this stuff. And I know it's hard. I mean, you feel responsible for the people that are working for you. You don't want to lose you don't want to lay people off. You don't want to lose your university or your high school. But I think we have almost come to that, what I would call a turning point for us, where we have to make a decision about this. And I think AI and all of those kinds of things, it could be that idea that, God can always work good in the midst of all of this. So AI may push us to understand it is not leading us, like you said, to be better thinkers, all these kinds of things. And we try to couch it. And I want to kind of get your insights on this, because this is what I'm told quite often when I really challenge ways that we need to be able to shut down AI in our classrooms or in our situations. And they always say, well, it's important that we teach our students to use it as a tool because it's here. And my thing is like, well, sin is here too. And so tools, a lot of students are going to go with what's the easiest, not how to use it as a tool. They're going to just let it write their paper. Where are you at with all of this? How do what do you think about this? How do you deal with this?
So again, I think there's probably a way where there's real space for careful, creative application of training and to talk about what this capacity is for tech. One, the first thing I think is no one does that. We do a full-scale introduction of the newest school technology and put it on every desk, every chalkboard, everywhere, all the time, 24/7. So that our track record on careful application of using this technology in a slow, careful, steady way, not great as far as the educational track record goes. Two, again, I think it's worth remembering, right, that when Steve Jobs puts all of his kids in Waldorf school, or when, Google or graduates of Montessori school, those are completely screen-free schools they went through high school. Precisely because there's a kind of fundamental development that happens, but then lets them go back and engage in detailed ways. Three, again, just to note that what we are seeing is the crisis in mental health and socialization and even basic learning that has arisen from the deeply online. That we're finding that the COVID generation, the generation that was entirely online educated during the pandemic, has deep, deep gaps in mathematics and basic reading that are real issues. So if we're saying what are the fundamental skills and tools we need to develop, well, let's get those ones first and then figure out how we can expand into tech. I think those are all really important things to think about in those areas. And lastly, I think when they were asking a vice president of Amazon, they said, well, do you imagine you're going to be laying off all of your entry-level workers with the prospects of AI? The VP said no, because I'm still going to need senior management at some point, and senior management comes from people who start as entry-level workers. And increasingly they ask, what are you going to need to do to use AI well? They say, well, you need to be the kind of person that can communicate, who knows where we are in cultural space and time to be able to catch and recognize AI hallucinations when they happen. You need to be able to be someone who is a deeply developed person first, and then we can focus on the technical skills of learning the AI tool. So all of that seems to me to say that the person who is formed deeply humanistically in the Catholic intellectual tradition, that person is ironically going to be also a great gem on the job market, because they're going to be able to come and have the kinds of skills that employers are looking for the people who are going to employ these tools of tech.
Well, President Washut, so often I hear students say it, teachers say it, the idea that, well, they don't need to learn that because, they can go online and it'll do it for them, kind of like we used to do with calculators, right? The idea is, oh, they don't really need to learn math, just let them use their calculator for everything. And I sense that with even creative things now, like music and art and all those kinds of things. Well, we don't need that because AI can do all that for us. What does that do to us as human beings?
Right.
And I mean, what do we do with this? I guess is my big question.
Right. So again, there's got to be some kind of a balance. Well, but I'm on a group that's thinking about the uses of AI, and one of the things we were talking about was the AI companion robots that are getting created, the virtual AI companions that you can speak to, in friendship. You can have them mimic friends of yours or people you'd like to know or various things.
Mm-hmm.
And someone asked me, so if, let's say, right now there's all sorts of ways we could poke holes in, like why this doesn't work and, the weirdness that comes out of that. Let's say we got to where that worked perfectly. Would we think you still didn't need to make friends because you could just have AI chatbots be like really perfect friends with you?
Mm-hmm.
And I think our initial reaction is, well, no, there's something really missing there. Fundamental relational aspects, fundamental human things that are not actually being developed in the real world. That there's something about being in reality and having a real person that you're pushing up against and responding to that's really important. And similarly, there's certain experiences that are just important for human development. If you think about the that Disney movie that came out a few years ago, WALL-E, where all of the very, very large people drinking giant sodas are in these chairs. They don't need to walk at all.
Right.
Because they're just on this spaceship going around the chairs. You think, well, yeah, you could say, I don't ever need to learn to walk because I can be carried around by this chair, and that's all I ever need to do.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a part of me that thinks, yeah, but isn't it bad for a human to never take a walk if they have the power to take the walk? Isn't there something about our connection with the physical world that needs to be developed there? And the thing is, we might not even know right now what all those connections are.
Right.
But what we do know is that psychologically, relationally, humans are most creative, flourish more, have more of their powers firing on all cylinders when they're in situations where they're interacting with real things in the natural world and with real people. And we see them as more creative, more dynamic, when they're reading great books, even when they're doing things like basic mathematics, even though we have calculators, there's powers and evidences of what it means to be human that come out in those situations that we might not have been able to articulate before. And so before we just double down and say, well, let's throw all of our skills into this, I think what Pope Leo is calling us to do is to say, let's emulate Carlo Acutis and Pier Giorgio Frassati, the first two canonizations he did that he gives to youth.
Mm-hmm.
Carlo Acutis, who was a young man who used the internet, but fasted in a very disciplined way. He spent no more than 2 hours a week as a 15-year-old boy, no more than 2 hours a week playing video games, right? A fast from these technologies gives us the space to develop the things we need. It gives us the space to develop mental health. It gives us the space to develop holiness. It gives us the space to develop relationships. And then the other state that Theo proposes for us is Pier Giorgio Frassati, who fills the absence of being online. He's doing obviously 100 years or so before there was an online thing, who fills that absence with going into the mountains, with deep friends, with memorizing poetry. These two boys that Pope Leo proposes to us as models of education for our time right now, let us know that to be deeply human is the most important thing education can accomplish for its students.
Mm-hmm.
And we just don't know what we're risking.
Yeah.
And so fast from the tech as best as one's able, immersed in the real as best as one able, study authentic humanizing education, great books and the rest as best as one's able. And we're going to have great human beings who are going to be able to use the tools of technology well. That seems to me the challenge for Catholic education.
One of the things too, and I just want to kind of get your insight on this, it appears to me that technology is all about making things easier, more convenient. But do you notice, or do you think, because you were talking about an AI companion, right? We can create machines in our image. In a sense, this is what we want you to do and be and say, so that there's really no disagreement. You just basically reflect what I want you to say. And so therefore, I don't need a safe space because somebody's disagreeing with me, right? I never have to engage that. I can just be kind of like, I'm right, and of course my little AI companion is telling me I'm right, so I must be right. So do you think part of this is this sense of when we lose the humanities, when we lose civil discourse, when we lose the ability to seek truth together, as St. Paul says, come, let us reason together, right? When we lose the ability to do that, I don't know which came first, the chicken or the egg. Is it that technology has pushed us in that direction, or we've sought it because we don't want to be able to, push outside of our little frame of reference?
Right. Again, the fundamental fig leaf question, right? Am I using my ingenuity to shelter myself and prevent myself from the vulnerability and trying to sort of not admit my wounds and my relation to the world around me? That seems to me is the fundamental temptation of technology. Wendell Berry has this beautiful metaphor he talks about between paths and roads in one of his essays. He says, paths are rituals of real relationship to the landscape, where the person responds to the world around them and meanders through, responds to the things that they confront, the stream or the hill or the rock, and move around and through them as they accomplish their tasks. It's sort of this ecology of communion while you walk from your house to go milk the cow or take the sheep out or whatever the case may be. But, he says, a road fundamentally is focused on not relating to the landscape. It's focused on getting from point A to B with as little interaction with everything in between as possible, and generally for the sake of incredible commerce or entertainment or something along these lines, right? That you're ignoring the things in between. So the interstate being the most explicit example of that. Now, Wendell Berry's not saying roads are always bad, but he's talking about the road versus the path mindset when we're thinking about technology. Am I thinking that part of being human is being in relation to the world I'm in space and time and community? Or am I thinking the most important thing is for me to get from A to B to make as much money as I possibly can or have as much distracting pleasure as I possibly can? And we just have to acknowledge that our tech, regardless of what we think about it, the more and more we're seeing the algorithms and the science behind the development of smartphone apps or the internet to resemble gambling machines and scrolling slot machines and various things. These are intended as addictive devices meant to insulate us within them and have us relate to them more and more for the sake of profit and distracting entertainment. And I think if that's the situation we're in, then the most important thing we can do as humans is not get sucked into profit and distracting entertainment, but allow ourselves to be an authentic relationship to the people in the world around us, the world that God created to reveal himself to us. God's first book, the natural world, our friend, that's where he comes to us. And then in Revelation, we can't give that up for the sake of pretending like we're in Eden and still living in fig leaves.
Right. We've got about a minute and a half, so I'm going to give you a minute and a half, President Washut, to tell me, what do you think Pope Leo is going to bring to this discussion on AI?
Again, I think the thing already that he's been signaling is that, one, he wants us to think about what are the economic consequences going to be for AI? What are the resource consequences? What are we actually going to be pouring into this giant machine? But then, two, and more importantly, what does it mean to be an authentic human? Leo the 13th, when he wrote in the Industrial Revolution, said, the important thing is to focus on the dignity of the worker and talk about what work really means for the human agent made in the image and likeness of God. And I think Leo's going to say the same thing to us about AI. What does it mean to be a person made for communion with the world around us, with other people, with our own bodies, and with God? The fall ruptured those four relationships. Christ came to restore those four relationships. And any technology that distracts us or takes us away from those fundamental relationships is a technology that's trying to offer fig leaves and have us pretend like we're not fallen, which means we're not able to be in relation to the redeeming Christ and those who are redeemed with us. And I think that will be Leo's fundamental focus. The Catholic intellectual tradition is an essential piece for restoring those relationships and helping us understand those relationships. And Leo will be a great voice emphasizing how do we promote humanity in the face of AI.
Oh, President Washut, it was great having you with us today. Thanks so much for taking time out of your busy schedule to talk about Catholic education, its challenges, its gifts, as we move ahead during especially Catholic Schools Week. Thanks so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Our audience know President Kyle Washut. He is the fourth president of Wyoming Catholic College. And so go out this week and be a real person. We'll see you next week
Amen.
on The Virtuous Life. I'm your host, Pat Odie Murray.